Have you ever pondered how the legendary Roman-Persian rivalry, one of the most famous and enduring conflicts in history, truly began? Such an epic saga couldn't just emerge by chance. It was ignited by a monumental event, a clash of titans that set the stage for centuries of warfare and intrigue. Imagine this: over 40,000 Roman soldiers, armed to the teeth, facing off against just 8,000 Persian cavalry. Sounds like an easy win for the Romans, right? But this battle was far from predictable. Stick around as we uncover how arrogance, strategy, and sheer determination turned this encounter into a pivotal clash that changed the course of history. Get ready for a story filled with surprising tactics, devastating losses, and a final twist that left an indelible mark on the ancient world. Let's jump right in. It's the Battle of Carrhae. So today is the southern end of Turkey, a little bit to the east, just north of Syria. The reason that battle took place is because of what a guy named Gaius Julius Caesar did. You guys incorrectly called him Julius Caesar. Caesar decided his family was going bankrupt. The best way he could solve the bankruptcy was to start an illegal war with the Celts living in Gaul, conquer them, and then plunder their resources and enslave them. And so that's what he does, and he becomes fabulously wealthy, and he saves his family from bankruptcy. He was part of a secret illegal arrangement with two other men. The three men were in the Senate. There were two patricians and a plebeian. The Senate always wanted a plebeian on board, and the plebeian, of course, was Pompey Magnus, the most famous plebeian to be in the Senate. Then Caesar, who is a patrician, and another guy named Crassus. Nobody ever remembers Crassus. Crassus and Pompey hated each other's guts, and there was a little bit of fear that maybe a civil war would break out. So to prevent the civil war, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar got together and created this secret little power arrangement so that they could control the Senate, and then basically the three of them would rule Rome, and everybody would pretend somebody else was doing it. Not cool. Crassus sees what Caesar does, sees how wealthy Caesar becomes, and goes, wow, I want this. Crassus was the governor of Syria. So he thought, what's the nearest rich place I can go conquer? And he went, it's Persia. Let me attack it. And so he took 40,000 Romans, and they marched from Syria into the Persian Empire, and they met at Carrhae. 40,000 Romans, 32,000 infantry, and they were heavy infantry, right? Think of Roman legionaries with the interlocking shields and the spears called pilum. They had a little gladius, a little short sword, and they would march in tight ranks, heavily armored. They were basically just a giant human wall, a pointy human wall, because they had the spears sticking out. Then about 4,000 light cavalry and about 4,000 medium cavalry. And they went and they meet the Persians at Carrhae. They meet 8,000 Persians on horseback, 8,000 cavalry, which is what they had. They had 8,000 cavalry, and the Persians that they met were light cavalry with bows and arrows. So the Romans were like, oh, we got this. 40,000 versus 8,000. What are they going to do? Shoot arrows at us. So the Persians ride up and they fire arrows from horseback. And the Romans were like, okay, testudo is where you take the shields, they interlock, you could connect them together. So they locked them together this way, and then the row behind them held the shields up like this, and then the row behind them held their shields up so that they interlocked to make a roof and a wall. The Persian arrows bounced harmlessly off the top. It probably sounded loud, but otherwise nobody's injured. At this point, the Romans are chuckling. They were like, what are you gonna do? Just keep doing that. You'll run out of arrows eventually, so then the Romans march forward slowly, and then Persians turn around and fire another round of arrows at the Romans, and then they ride off. So now the Romans think, okay, well, let's chase them, so they go out of testudo, because you can't run like this. You can't run holding a fort near, you need to lower your shields. So they lower their shields and take off on foot running, and they're chasing the 8,000 Persian horse archers. Persian horse archers turn around in their saddles and fire backward. Nobody had ever done that in battle. The Romans are shocked. They're so surprised by the thing they don't have time to pull up testudo, and hundreds of Romans go down. This rattles the Romans. They're like, whoa, we can't just chase these guys. Okay, we need to be a little more cautious. The Persians start running up a hill, so now the Romans are slowly following after them. The Persians turn around and shoot, but because the Romans have slowed down, they go back into testudo, and not many are injured. They don't quite get into testudo in time, so some of them do get injured, and so it slows the Romans down. They're getting a little nervous about all of this. But then the Persians go over the top of the hill. So now the Romans are like, well, we might as well run. I can't shoot through the hill. So they start running, and they run up the hill. And just as they're cresting the hill, to their shock and dismay, the Romans see 1,000 cataphracts. Cataphracts were fully armored soldiers on top of armored horses. The first time Europeans will do that, put a fully armored man on top of an armored horse, is 14 centuries later, at the end of medieval Europe. The Persians were technologically 14 centuries ahead of any European society in terms of heavy cavalry. 1,000 cataphracts were far superior to 8,000 Roman cavalry, because they were tanks. There was almost nothing you could do to them, and they're charging up the hill as the Romans are charging down the hill. So the Romans charging down the hill are trying to stop, and they're shouting to the guys behind them, hey, stop running. But the guys behind them can't really hear them, in part because some of them are on the other side of the hill, but in part because of all the noise. The guys running down the hill can't stop running, because if they do, they'll get knocked down and trampled to death. So they're forced to run towards these cavalry units. They can't get into formation, and the cataphracts cut through them like a hot knife through butter. It's a catastrophe. Romans are dying everywhere. The cataphracts get to the top of the hill, they turn around and come back through. They get to the bottom of the hill, they turn around and come back through. The Romans are doing everything they can to try to create order, get back into combat formation, and they can't do it. Eventually, Crassus's son, who is up on the hill, gets identified by one of the Persian warriors. They kill him, cut off his head, stick it on a spike, and jam it into the ground so that his dad can see his head. The Romans are completely disheartened. Crassus comes up with a new strategy, because while the cataphracts are going up and down the hill, the horse archers return, and they're just shooting arrows at the Romans, who can't get into formation, let alone go into testudo. So the Romans are getting hammered by arrows and cut to pieces by these heavy cavalrymen. So he decides, you know what we'll do? We'll just fight this until the Persians run out of arrows. It's always a bad day when your goal is to get the other side to run out of ammo, because they're shooting at you. You know what I mean? It's also a really bad day when the Persians brought 1,000 camels loaded with 1,000 arrows each. They had 1,000,000 arrows, and as the Persian horse archers are firing the arrows, the camels just ride up to them and hand them more. For all intents and purposes, 1,000,000 arrows versus 40,000 men, the Persians had an unlimited supply of ammo. Crassus's strategy is a disaster, and the Persians' 9,000 soldiers are tearing these Romans to pieces. The only thing that saves the Romans is the sun goes down, and the Persians and the Romans basically call it. They break up into camps to eat and cook and go to sleep. In the morning, Crassus comes out and says, let's talk the Persian general. His name is Shurina. He's on a horse. Shurina says there's nothing to talk about. He had a stick with him. He draws a line in the ground and says, this side is Persian, this side is Rome. That line is the Euphrates River. Crassus goes, no, and when he does, one of the Roman soldiers freaks out, reaches over and grabs Shurina's horse's rein. The fight starts again. The Persians see that and swords come out, and they just tear the Romans to pieces again. On the second day, about 10,000 Romans escaped. About 10,000 Romans were captured, including Crassus, and 20,000 Romans were killed. We don't have a real firm number, but about 200 Persians died. When you outnumber the enemy 5 to 1, and they kill you at a ratio of 100 to 1, that's a bad day, that's bad. They wait until the Persian emperor shows up. His name is Orodes. Orodes brings Crassus into his tent. Crassus was wounded. He was in bad shape. The Persian soldiers were treating him because they wanted to keep him alive so that Orodes could have a nice conversation with him. They kept him alive. They bring him forward. They have him get on his knees in front of the Persian emperor. And Orodes goes, the most important thing in Persian culture is to be a good host. You are my guest in the Persian Empire. You came here for gold, I will provide. They pried open Crassus's mouth and they brought a pot of molten gold and they poured it down his throat. That event triggers almost 700 years of back and forth warfare between the Romans and the Persians. The consequences of this battle fueled centuries of conflict between the empires. It's a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in the theater of war. Thanks for joining us on this incredible historical journey. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more captivating tales from the annals of history. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.